On the night of June 2, 2011, the college town of Bloomington, Indiana, moved with its usual rhythm. Indiana University students, freed from exams and responsibilities, filled the bars and streets with the energy of summer. Among them was Lauren Spierer, a 20-year-old student who stood out not because of her height. She was barely 5 feet tall and just 90 pounds, but because of her presence. Friends described her as spirited, fun-loving, and full of life, the kind of young woman who could make an ordinary night memorable. Lauren had grown up in Scarsdale, New York, before choosing to attend Indiana University, hundreds of miles from home. Her small size and carefree demeanor made her seem almost fragile, but she thrived in the bustling campus environment. That summer evening, she stepped into the Bloomington nightlife with the same excitement as countless other students. Lauren's night began at Kilroy's Sports Bar, a popular hangout for undergrads. The bar was noisy and crowded, filled with music, chatter, and the low hum of televisions playing above the booths. Lauren had been drinking, and she was clearly intoxicated. So much so that when she left the bar around 2:30 a.m., she forgot both her phone and her shoes. Barefoot, she made her way into the warm Indiana night, accompanied by friends. From this point forward, her movements would be pieced together not from her own words, but from surveillance cameras, eyewitness reports, and fragmented accounts from those who last saw her alive. Lauren walked with a group back toward the apartments near 11th Street and College Avenue, an area just off the main strip, filled with student housing. She eventually ended up at the apartment of Corey Rossman, a fellow student she knew. By this point, Lauren was visibly struggling with her balance. Witnesses would later describe her as stumbling and disoriented. At Rossman's apartment, things became tense. Corey reportedly got into a brief altercation with another student, Lauren's friend, Jesse Wolfe, who was also her boyfriend. Jesse had confronted Rossman earlier about Lauren's drinking and safety. Some believe this tension spilled into that night, creating a conflict about who was responsible for looking after her. Around 3 a.m., Lauren left Rossman's apartment, this time accompanied by Corey's roommate, Michael Beth. Surveillance footage shows her moving through the apartment complex. Despite her condition, she continued to insist she wanted to go home, but she never made it there. Instead, Lauren went to another friend's apartment, Jay Rosenbaum, who lived nearby. It was now closer to 4 a.m. Jay later told investigators that Lauren wanted to return to her own place but was clearly too intoxicated to safely make it back alone. He claimed he tried to convince her to stay the night at his apartment, but Lauren refused. She insisted on leaving. At around 4:30 a.m., Lauren was last seen walking south on College Avenue, barefoot, dressed in black leggings and a white tank top. Witnesses recalled her being unsteady, swaying as she moved through the dimly lit streets. She had no phone, no shoes, and no purse. That final sighting would become the anchor of the investigation, the last confirmed moment anyone saw Lauren alive. After that, she seemed to vanish into thin air. The quiet, ordinary streets of Bloomington gave no hint of what had just occurred. Streetlights glowed faintly above sidewalks lined with trees, casting long shadows into the night. Few cars passed at that hour, and most residents were asleep. For Lauren, this isolation meant vulnerability. Alone, intoxicated, and without means of communication, she was in one of the most dangerous positions imaginable. Within hours, her absence was noticed. When Lauren didn't return home, and when calls to her phone went unanswered, a phone still sitting at Kilroy's Sports Bar, alarm bells began to ring. By morning, her disappearance was not just unusual, but deeply concerning. This was not the kind of situation where a student slept off a late night and returned later. Something was wrong. Lauren Spierer had walked less than a mile from where she started that night, and yet, somewhere along those familiar streets, she disappeared completely. You're watching Trace of Evil, where we reveal true crimes, unsolved disappearances, and mysteries surrounding crime. Like and subscribe to watch more episodes from our channel. Let's get back into the story of Lauren Spierer. When the sun rose over Bloomington on June 3, 2011, the usual rhythm of campus life was interrupted by a growing unease. Lauren Spierer's friends expected to see her return to her apartment by morning, but as the hours passed, her absence became more alarming. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Her phone, after all, was still sitting abandoned at Kilroy's sports bar, where she had left it the night before. Her purse and shoes were missing too. By late morning, concern had escalated into panic. Jesse Wolfe, Lauren's boyfriend, who had been out of town during part of the night, reported her missing to the police. Soon after, word spread quickly among her friends, classmates, and the wider Indiana University community. Lauren had disappeared. The Bloomington Police Department responded swiftly. Officers began retracing Lauren's last known steps, starting with the fragments of eyewitness accounts from Corey Rossman, Michael Beth, and Jay Rosenbaum. Each man offered slightly different details of the night. Corey admitted he had been drinking heavily and said his memory was hazy. Michael claimed to have escorted Lauren part of the way but insisted he left her safely at Jay's apartment. Jay told investigators that Lauren refused to stay the night and insisted on going home. By all accounts, she had vanished only minutes after leaving his building. What disturbed investigators most was how vulnerable Lauren had been. She was last seen walking alone, intoxicated, without shoes or a phone. An easy target for anyone lurking in the quiet streets. Within 24 hours, the search for Lauren became one of the largest missing person operations in Bloomington's history. Law enforcement, family, and volunteers poured into the area. Flyers with Lauren's photo, a smiling young woman with long blonde hair, were plastered across storefronts, telephone poles, and campus bulletin boards. Search teams scoured every possible location she could have wandered or been taken. Police organized extensive ground searches, deploying cadaver dogs, ATVs, and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging to sweep wooded areas, rivers, and fields around Bloomington. Crews combed through Lake Monroe, abandoned quarries, and drainage systems. Every corner of the city that could conceal a body was investigated. At the same time, officers conducted door-to-door canvassing, asking residents if they had seen or heard anything unusual in the early hours of June 3rd. Some reported seeing a young woman matching Lauren's description stumbling near College Avenue, but none could pinpoint what happened next. No one witnessed a struggle, a vehicle stopping, or an abduction. It was as though she had stepped off the sidewalk and into a void. The Spierer family arrived in Bloomington almost immediately. Charlene and Robert Spierer, Lauren's parents, were thrust into a nightmare that would define the rest of their lives. They held press conferences, pleaded with the public for help, and coordinated search efforts alongside volunteers. Charlene, in particular, became a relentless voice, urging those who had been with Lauren that night to tell the full truth. Media outlets descended on the town, amplifying the mystery. Local news ran updates daily, while national outlets like CNN and NBC covered the story. For weeks, Lauren's disappearance dominated headlines. Bloomington, usually a quiet college town, became the center of an intense true crime spotlight. As the investigation expanded, police grew increasingly focused on the men who had last seen Lauren. Rossman, Beth, and Rosenbaum were questioned repeatedly. All insisted they knew nothing of her fate. Their stories, however, raised eyebrows. Small contradictions in timing, uncertainty about where Lauren was at each stage of the night, and inconsistencies about her condition. The police did not publicly accuse them of wrongdoing, but suspicion lingered. Adding to the complexity, investigators discovered Lauren had a history of partying and drug use. On the night she disappeared, she had been drinking heavily and possibly using substances. This fueled one of the prevailing theories, that Lauren had overdosed or suffered a medical emergency, and those around her panicked, hiding what had happened. Despite these suspicions, the investigation stalled. Weeks passed, then months. Every promising lead ended in disappointment. Witnesses who claimed to have seen her later retracted or proved unreliable. Anonymous tips flooded in, but none cracked the case. As the search dragged on, frustration mounted. Police offered rewards for information, and the FBI became involved, lending their resources to the investigation. Yet, despite thousands of man-hours, no trace of Lauren was ever found. No clothing, no body, no personal items discarded. The sheer absence of physical evidence baffled detectives. The Spierers refused to give up. They launched social media campaigns, organized community vigils, and kept Lauren's face in the public eye. Charlene and Robert often expressed open frustration with the men who had been with Lauren, implying they knew more than they were admitting. Their pointed criticism would eventually lead to lawsuits, but at this stage it was about pressure to break the silence. By the end of summer 2011, the official search efforts had scaled down, but the investigation remained active. The streets Lauren had walked that night, now etched into the memory of the town, were no longer ordinary. Every step of her final journey had been mapped, scrutinized, and analyzed. And yet, the last gap, the few minutes between leaving Jay Rosenbaum's apartment and disappearing into the night, remained unfilled. Lauren Spierer's disappearance had transformed from a local emergency into a national enigma. The case had all the hallmarks of a solvable mystery: a defined timeline, multiple witnesses, a confined geographic area. And yet, despite the overwhelming response, Bloomington was left with no answers. The question was no longer just where did she go, but also who wasn't telling the truth. When Lauren Spierer vanished into the Bloomington night, the search for her did not begin with the urgency one might expect. To many in law enforcement, young adults going missing in college towns was not unusual. Students occasionally disappeared after heavy drinking, crashed at friends' apartments, or simply wanted a night away. Yet within hours, it became apparent that this case was far different. Lauren had not returned home. Her phone, her purse, and her shoes were all left behind. She had not contacted her parents, her boyfriend, or any of her friends. The silence was immediate, and it was chilling. The Bloomington Police Department launched an official search on June 3, 2011. They began with interviews, starting with those who had last seen Lauren alive. This circle was alarmingly small. Her friends, the men she had been with that night, and a handful of strangers who had spotted her stumbling along the streets. Investigators pressed for timelines, asking each person to retrace their steps, second by second. The early hours of the investigation were consumed by an attempt to stitch together a timeline that seemed to unravel as quickly as it was built. Lauren's boyfriend, Jesse Wolfe, became one of the first to sit down with detectives. He had been at home that night, not out with Lauren, and he said he grew concerned when he couldn't reach her. Jesse insisted he had no idea where she might have gone. Police cleared him quickly, though some members of the public would later speculate about his role, as often happens when intimate partners are involved. Investigators, however, turned their focus elsewhere. Attention soon zeroed in on the group of men who had been with Lauren in the hours before she disappeared. Names such as Corey Rossman and Michael Beth would become familiar in every retelling of the case. Rossman, by his own account, had been drinking heavily and ended up involved in a scuffle near Smallwood Plaza after Lauren confronted some men in the lobby. He claimed to have been punched in the face and later said his memory of the night was foggy. Beth, meanwhile, insisted he had escorted Rossman home and returned to find Lauren leaving the apartment with another friend. These contradictions created a tangled narrative that detectives struggled to clarify. Each man's story introduced new gaps and uncertainties. Some claimed not to remember key details, while others contradicted one another entirely. Investigators grew frustrated, yet they remained cautious, knowing that mishandling these accounts could ruin any chance of building a clear case. As police questioned the men, Lauren's parents, Robert and Charlene Spierer, arrived in Bloomington. The couple was immediately struck by the atmosphere of secrecy surrounding the investigation. They felt some of the young men were withholding information, and they began to publicly urge anyone with knowledge of Lauren's fate to come forward. Their presence transformed the investigation from a local police matter into a national story. The sight of grieving parents begging for answers under the glare of television cameras gave Lauren's disappearance a haunting urgency. The Spierers' pleas resonated across Indiana and beyond. Volunteers from the community poured into Bloomington, eager to help. The search effort soon swelled into one of the largest the state had ever seen. Helicopters scanned wooded areas and farmlands. Drones flew over the White River, which twisted ominously through the landscape. Divers searched the murky waters. Police dogs sniffed fields and abandoned properties. Posters with Lauren's face appeared on storefronts, lampposts, and bulletin boards in every direction. Her petite frame, blonde hair, and bright smile became impossible to miss. Despite the exhaustive effort, days turned into weeks with no breakthrough. Every promising lead dissolved into disappointment. Someone claimed to have seen a girl resembling Lauren at a nearby gas station. Surveillance footage revealed it was not her. Another tip suggested she had been spotted in a different state. Again, it was false. Each dead end sapped momentum and drained hope, yet the Spierers refused to relent. Theories began to swirl as the search dragged on. Some investigators leaned toward the possibility of an abduction, pointing to Lauren's vulnerable state that night. Others considered the likelihood of an accidental overdose, given her drinking and alleged drug use, and speculated that those with her panicked and covered up the truth. Rumors even emerged that her body had been disposed of in a quarry outside Bloomington or hidden in the woods. Without evidence, however, these remained just that, rumors. What unsettled police most was the silence of those closest to Lauren during her final hours. None of the men she had been with that night were ever formally charged in connection to her disappearance, but suspicions lingered. Some refused polygraph tests. Others spoke only through attorneys. Their reluctance fueled public speculation that they knew more than they were saying. As media attention grew, the FBI joined the search, lending more resources and advanced technology. They combed through phone records, analyzed digital footprints, and attempted to map Lauren's movements minute by minute. Yet again, the trail ended abruptly around 4:30 a.m. on June 3, 2011, near 11th Street and College Avenue. After that point, there was simply nothing. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. For her parents, the lack of answers was devastating. They watched as law enforcement's momentum slowed, as days turned into months without resolution. The Spierers began to fear what many families of the missing eventually realize, that they might never know the truth. But their determination never wavered. They vowed to keep Lauren's name alive, to push for answers no matter how painful the silence became. The disappearance of Lauren Spierer was no longer just a Bloomington mystery. It had become a national tragedy, a haunting reminder of how quickly a young life could be swallowed by the night. And as investigators deepened their search, the shadow of suspicion, secrecy, and unanswered questions grew darker still. In the months following Lauren Spierer's disappearance, the search effort gradually shifted from a frantic mobilization to a long, grinding pursuit of answers. Flyers that once hung fresh and bright across Bloomington began to fade under the sun and rain. Volunteers, who had once gathered by the hundreds, dwindled as daily life forced them back to routine. Yet the Spierers refused to retreat. They remained fixtures in the town that had swallowed their daughter, determined to keep her name alive even as hope dimmed. One of the most difficult realities for the family to confront was the silence of those who had last seen Lauren alive. Police questioned them repeatedly, yet no one provided the kind of detail that could unlock the mystery. The Spierers became convinced that these men knew more than they admitted. Robert and Charlene grew vocal about their frustration, telling the media that someone was withholding critical information. This tension between the family and Lauren's circle of friends became one of the defining features of the case. Years later, the Spierers even filed a civil lawsuit against several of the young men, alleging negligence and responsibility in Lauren's disappearance. They argued that the combination of alcohol, drugs, and reckless behavior created the conditions that led to their daughter's vanishing. Though the case was ultimately dismissed, the lawsuit underscored the family's unwavering belief that Lauren's last companions held the key to the truth. Meanwhile, investigators continued to follow leads, but every path seemed to circle back into the same void. The possibility of abduction remained on the table. Bloomington, though a college town, was surrounded by rural roads, wooded areas, and quarries that could easily conceal dark secrets. Some theorized that a predator had spotted Lauren stumbling through the streets and seized an opportunity. Others believed she never left the orbit of those she trusted most that night. Among the most persistent theories was that Lauren had overdosed and that her companions panicked. Rumors circulated that her body might have been disposed of in a landfill or quarry. Police conducted extensive searches of landfills, including moving thousands of tons of trash in hopes of finding evidence. They scoured the woods outside Bloomington and sent divers into the water. Each search ended the same way, empty-handed. As the years wore on, The case faded from national headlines, though it never disappeared completely. Every anniversary brought renewed coverage. New tips trickled in, but none broke the case open. Detectives remained haunted by the gaps in the timeline, the missing minutes that could explain everything. The sense of unfinished business hung over the investigation like a shadow. The emotional toll on Lauren's family was immense. Lauren Spierer became the public face of the search, giving interviews, maintaining a website, and pleading for anyone with knowledge to step forward. She often spoke directly to those who had been with Lauren that night, insisting that the truth was within reach if only someone would break their silence. Her words carried both grief and defiance, a refusal to let her daughter vanish into anonymity. The community, too, felt the weight of the case. Bloomington was no stranger to student parties or youthful recklessness, but Lauren's disappearance exposed a darker undercurrent. Parents of other students grew fearful. Some students said the case changed how they moved through the city, especially at night. The atmosphere of innocence that often cloaked college life had been pierced, leaving a lingering unease. Even law enforcement admitted frustration. Without physical evidence, no body, no confession, and no undeniable witness testimony, the case remained stubbornly unresolved. Detectives described it as one of the most complex and frustrating investigations they had ever faced. Over time, the sheer lack of progress made many fear that the truth might never surface. Still, Lauren's name endured. Her parents ensured that her story remained visible, using social media and public campaigns to remind the world that she had not simply been forgotten. They framed her disappearance not only as a personal tragedy, but also as a warning about vulnerability, accountability, and the importance of speaking out. The legacy of Lauren Spierer's case lies in this unending demand for truth. It has become emblematic of the countless unsolved disappearances that haunt families across America. For some, it is a story about how secrets and silence can obstruct justice. For others, it is a cautionary tale about how quickly a night of fun can spiral into irreversible loss. Even now, more than a decade later, the questions remain as piercing as they were on that June morning in 2011. Where did Lauren go after she was last seen on that Bloomington street corner? Did she fall victim to a predator? Or was her fate sealed in the company of people she thought were friends? Why has no one come forward with the missing piece of the puzzle? The absence of answers is its own form of torment. For Robert and Lauren Spierer, time has not dulled the pain. Their daughter's smile, captured in countless photographs, remains frozen at 20 years old, forever young, forever missing. They continue to carry the weight of uncertainty, living each day with the knowledge that the truth is out there, somewhere, hidden behind silence and shadows. Lauren's disappearance is more than just an unsolved case. It is a wound, an enduring reminder of how fragile human connection can be, how quickly trust can collapse, and how silence can bury truth. Until that silence is broken, the mystery of what happened to Lauren Spierer will remain suspended in the night she never returned from. Haunting, unresolved, and unbearably tragic.